20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You've probably heard of it. Directed by Richard Fleischer, starring Kirk Douglas, James Mason, Paul Lucas, and Peter Lorre. The story follows a ship full of these men who are going out to investigate these mysterious sinkings. It's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, where that giant monster, the Kraken, is sinking all these ships, and in this movie there's some kind of monster believed to be sinking the ships. They don't know why, so they send these men out to go and find out. And once they do find out, the movie takes a whole new direction and like this whole other plot starts. And I was really excited to see this movie because I had never seen it before. I'd heard a lot about it. It's one of those movies where when I was going to Blockbuster, you know, as a young kid, I'd always see it on the shelves and I was like, what is that movie? And now finally I get to see it on the, you know, giant XD screen, even though it wasn't in the full aspect ratio as that screen, which is floor to ceiling, just huge. I was still like, alright, sit back, relax, and enjoy this masterpiece. But honestly, I gotta say, I was underwhelmed. I don't think it's a terrible movie, but I just was expecting something, I guess, different. Parts of this film are entertaining, and for the most part, the cast was really good. You know, all the performances were believable and whatnot, and I kind of got sucked into it. But at the end of the day, I mean, I really am, I'm not looking forward to watching it again. It's one of those things where I'm glad that I saw it, you know, I'm glad that I finally got to see it, but ultimately if down the road somebody got it from Netflix and they were like, hey, you wanna sit down and watch this, I'd be like, no. About an hour into it, like, it becomes just sort of a completely different film, and it no longer felt like I was watching the same movie. It's like in the first half they had this really solid idea, and then like, at a certain point they were like, this storyline really isn't gonna hold it for 2 hours. We gotta find somewhere to take it, and they just went this other place, and I was just like, that's no. And I kept thinking about various films throughout the entire movie. Like, there was one part where I was like, dude, that so influenced Dead Man's Chest. And then there was a certain point where I was like, dude, I'm watching an Ed Wood movie now. It was like a mix of just different movies that like I'd seen, like, that came after this movie, and I was just like, I don't know, it was more just like thinking about those films and thinking about this movie. And there were certain parts of this film where I just kind of like blanked out for a second. And there's a bit where they're down in the water just looking for food and treasure. These other guys are looking for treasure anyway. And as I was watching the scene, something happened, and all of a sudden, it was like 3 minutes later or whatever, and I all of a sudden had no idea what was going on. That happened quite a few times throughout the movie, and I honestly don't know why. I just wasn't impressed. I guess that's it. And I gotta say, the end of this movie reminded me so much of that film Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. I was just constantly thinking about other films that this movie had clearly influenced, and I was trying so hard to get invested in the story, invested in the characters, that I just couldn't. And I hate when that happens because I really wanted to like this movie, and while some parts were enjoyable, you know, this movie wasn't bad. It just, I couldn't really, you know, get into it. And then there's Peter Lorre's character, who is following our main character at the beginning of the film, who ultimately becomes like a secondary character after like a certain point. And the problem with Peter Lorre's character was that up to a certain point he like had an objective. He was helping this person find this monster, and then after a while he all of a sudden had like no objective. He was just there to be funny, and while he was funny, he wasn't necessary. He was like extra baggage because he was introduced in the movie, and unless they killed him off, which I guess they didn't want to do, he just had to be in the rest of the movie. The sea lion though, funny as hell. So while I ultimately did not enjoy it as much as I wanted to, I wouldn't say it's a bad movie that you should avoid. I just wouldn't recommend it to everybody. It was directed well, good dialogue, you know, good production design, all of that good stuff. But after a while, the main focus just went to the dogs, and like this movie became something else. And the captain character they introduced about halfway in wasn't very interesting at all. And I feel like in the scripting process, if they had just kind of restructured it a certain way, if they had, I don't know, just kind of avoided certain things like going in certain directions, it would have been a better film. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna give this movie 2.5 out of 5 stars. If you're a hardcore lover of this movie, you know, great. Fantastic. I just couldn't get into it. Thanks for watching as always.